Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 65, Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. Welcome to Point Blank. My name is Kurt, and joining me, as always, here's Justin.
Hey, Kurt. Hey, people out there in the ether world. How are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good. It's technically the last day of spring break for me, so I'll be going back to class tomorrow. It actually looks like spring in Seattle here. I can see the buds on the trees out the window, so I'm looking forward to the nicer weather and getting outside a bit more. You just had snow a couple days ago, didn't you, Justin?
Oh, yeah, we did have a little bit of snow, but just yesterday evening I opened up the windows for the first time, so we're in that, that transitional space where winter and summer are fighting for our hearts, and both appear to be winning. But today was in the 70s, tomorrow's going to be in the 70s, and I'm starting to feel like we're stuck in perpetual, the train ride through spring into summer has commenced. I do see the buds on the trees and things are feeling and looking up. But of course, in April, there's always the chance of a stray snowstorm. And anytime that I declare spring to be officially here for good, I learn to regret that. So I'm going to say that there's probably one more chance of winter, and before we can officially kiss it goodbye.
It is a mix, and folks, that gives you a sense of when we're recording here. We have been very slow of late, and we do apologize for that. Life gets in the way. Justin and I have both been very busy lately with our various school and work projects. But we try to keep at it. And today we're here with one of the newest books we've done a show on. This is Razorblade Tears, which came out in the middle of 2021. This one's by S.A. Cosby, and it is, it's, if you pay attention to the news in crime fiction, this one has been all over the place. Positive reviews, up for numerous awards. So that's what we're going to be getting into today.
Yeah. S.A. Cosby's been a cause celeb for a while now, definitely in vogue in crime fiction circles and getting some pretty mainstream press. So if we were a different kind of podcast, we'd be a little more on the ball with reviewing contemporary works. We're obviously not that kind of podcast. We're not trying to be the first ones on the scene to review a book. We're always 9 months late, and that's okay because we're not really into trying to capture that first wave of reviews or critique. We're here to more discuss the context of the book, sort of place it in the overall canon of crime fiction and try to understand it from that angle. And it usually takes a little bit more distance for that to be done effectively, which is why it's easier to do with, Dashiell Hammett than it is with somebody who put out a book, a couple months in the past. Nonetheless, this was a fun read, and we did review S.A. Cosby's previous novel, Blacktop Wasteland, in episode 55. So there is a little bit of a thread going with our, involvement and interaction with his work. And I look forward to seeing what we have to say about this one in the context of his previous, soon-to-be classic novel.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, just the fact that we've covered two of his books already, one way or the other, I think that Cosby is going to be, over the long term, going to be considered one of the best crime writers of this particular decade, maybe. I don't know. Probably. If these two books are anything to show, I think we're going to see his name around for a long time. So it's worth diving into these. But what will their long-term effect be? Obviously, we can't predict that. But he's only really published 3 novel-length books, and I've read 2 out of the 3 of them, and they've both been very good. So I guess we should maybe get into a summary of Razorblade Tears. I guess we should also warn our listeners that this is a new book. There's obviously going to be some spoilers here. we're probably going to stay away from the latter part of the book. I would say the last, certainly the conclusion. But you know, if you don't want any spoilers at all, go read the book. Justin, why don't we go ahead and get into a summary of the book first, and we'll try not to give too much of it away if you're still on the fence about this one, and we'll give it our initial rating.
Sounds good. Here I go. So Razorblade Tears, as Kurt mentioned already, was heavily hyped in 2021, and it's the second straight S.A. Cosby novel to be published to great fanfare. The first, Blacktop Wasteland, we reviewed in episode 55. Both of us liked it a lot. It offered a gritty, hard-boiled take on crime fiction that was centered on a working-class black experience in the South. Razorblade Tears returns to that same geographical and social terrain, but it expands its view to incorporate more deeply themes of class and gender in addition to the ever-present issue of race. Crime fiction writers are rarely this direct in addressing the social problems that fuel or guide their work, but even though this novel is a book that deals with quote-unquote social issues, it maintains that hard-boiled grit and ultra-violence that readers have come to expect from Cosby's work. To start, I would say that there are two protagonists. The A1, or primary protagonist, is a guy named Ike Randolph. The A2, or secondary protagonist, would be Buddy Lee Jenkins. They're both grieving fathers. Though not quite friends, their temporary alliance has the feel of a mix-matched buddy pair-up that you sometimes see in crime fiction. The novel starts with a knock at the door. It's the police, and they have come to tell Ike that his son Isaiah, along with his partner Derek, has been found murdered. At the funeral, Ike and his wife Mia run into Buddy Lee Jenkins, who happens to be Derek's father. Derek is the spouse of Isaiah. They were a gay couple. They were married men. Buddy Lee and Ike are the fathers. The premise from there on is straightforward. Ike and Buddy are both essentially homophobic ex-cons with 20-something sons. This has been a complicated situation for both of them, complicated relationships all over the place. Their sons were gay. Their sons were married to each other. Their sons were murdered. This is what sets off the book. This isn't a spoiler at all. This is the basic premise that gets all the plot wheels turning. How will Ike and Buddy Lee, two flawed and essentially broken men, pick up the pieces and move forward with their lives? This being a hard-boiled crime fiction tale, you can imagine that revenge is on the table. And it is, as Buddy Lee tries almost immediately to persuade Ike into taking action to find their son's killers. But at first, Ike refuses Buddy Lee's offer. He doesn't want to go back to crime. He's been in prison. He's married now to Mia. He's raising Derek and Isaiah's orphan child. They're doing that on their own. He runs a successful landscaping business. He doesn't want to go back and give up what he's built his whole life around. Buddy Lee has a different situation. He doesn't have much responsibility. He's been divorced for years. His ex-wife married some rich asshole. Buddy Lee lives in a trailer, drinking himself to death, essentially. His health is terrible. He's coughing up blood. He doesn't have much to lose. So it does take an act of staged emotional manipulation on Buddy Lee's part to persuade Ike to join him on the quest for vengeance. And when Ike agrees, his old self reappears. We learn that he used to go by the name of Riot Randolph, during his crime days and his time in prison. He's the kind of dude that can flip a switch and become your worst nightmare if you cross him. And we see that repeatedly throughout the novel. Once they agree that they're going to seek vengeance in some way, this becomes a little bit of a mystery. Their quest takes them to Richmond, Virginia, the big city in the area, to question their son's co-workers. First to the place where Isaiah worked as a journalist. Turns out Isaiah is working on a story that could be scandalous to a local rich dude. The source for this story is someone named Tangerine, who plays a significant role in the story a little bit later on. The men continue to rough up anybody who doesn't answer their questions. They're kind of dicks about it, actually, but I guess the rationalization is that they're grieving. But I did note that. I was like, wow, they're mean to people because they're not giving answers, and it sort of feels like they're bad cops to a bunch of people that don't necessarily deserve to be brutalized. But I'll leave that where it's at. Buddy Lee terrorizes a cake shop. There's a scene where a cartoonish anarchist trope gets his hand broken by Ike. Eventually, they learn that a white supremacist biker gang might have something to do with the deaths of their sons. We don't know for sure. We don't know the extent. Is it a hate crime? Is it because the sons were gay? Or is there something behind it all? Is there something bigger? Is there a nefarious, overarching kind of plot? Maybe a rich person who doesn't want a scandal. Maybe that's the guy who is sort of choreographing this situation. Obviously, this is a mystery, and we're not going to reveal the answer to those questions at this point. All of this culminates into a huge showdown at the end of the novel. I won't spoil the ending, given how new the book is, but Cosby does have a penchant for big action scenes, and here he doesn't disappoint. This movie was already optioned for film. I think it would make a good film. I already hear stories on Twitter about people fantasizing who's going to take the role of Ike and who's going to, take the role of Buddy. So that's happening. To me, the best parts of this novel are the conversations between characters about complex social issues. Buddy Lee and Ike both had gay sons, but they were not supportive dads by any means. Both were blatantly homophobic. They know it, and they struggle with it. They also work to rectify it over the course of the story. Add to this the addition of Tangerine, a trans woman who knew Ike and Buddy Lee's sons and plays a critical role in the story's outcome. She forces the two dads to reflect even more deeply on their prejudices and shortcomings. But Cosby doesn't stop there. He continues his examination of class and race in the American South. Buddy Lee is a poor working-class white man living on the margins of society. Other than for the color of his skin, he is not privileged, and perhaps is the kind of guy who would be behind a Trump re-election campaign. Ike is a middle-class business owner, but as a black man, he is constantly having to defend himself against both overt and structural white supremacy. The fact that these aren't just character backstories, but actual conversation threads throughout the novel is what makes this novel and Cosby's other work so rich, to me at least. So this novel is a mystery to find out who done it. It's a broken knuckle revenge thriller, and it's a meditation on homophobia, class, and race in the American South. If you want squeamish ex-cons having difficult conversations about homosexuality, you got it. If you want incredible and sometimes cartoonish ultra-violence, you got it. If you want similes so simile-ish you'd believe Chandler had risen from his grave, you got that as well. And if you want a ready-for-Hollywood climax that will leave you singed, you got that. Overall, I would give this book 4 hits out of 5. It's not as strong a novel as Blacktop Wasteland, but the subject matter is important, and I applaud Cosby for his bravery in confronting issues like homophobia and transphobia and creating characters like Tangerine that challenge the genre and move it forward. So that's my feeling about this. I hope I didn't reveal too much. There's a lot that I didn't say. I'm curious to see where this book stacks up compared to Blacktop Wasteland for you, Kurt. What are your thoughts?
I think you've hit the nail pretty much on the head there. I'll say, first of all, that, I don't actually remember what we gave Blacktop Wasteland as a rating, but I have a feeling it was pretty good. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was probably a 4.5 or something like that.
I think so.
Yeah. And I think that I agree with you. I think this is a 4 out of 5. I think it's a solid 4 out of 5. There is a little bit here that we'll get into later that I found took away from this being a full out 5 or 4.5 out of 5. I think, like you said, I think Cosby did an excellent job for wrapping in or bringing in these contemporary issues into crime fiction, dealing with them in an honest way, and taking that route, especially as a relatively new author. Like it does take a little bit of courage to do that, and I think he did it quite well. As you said, Cosby's action sequences are great, even if they're become a little over the top. Sometimes that's what we want in a novel, but he writes that stuff great. I think his social issues are excellent. I think one of the things that he writes about so well in this case and in Blacktop Wasteland too is these struggles with ideas of toxic masculinity and societal shift in how we think about what is the masculine. And I think in a lot of ways, that's one of the things that is in this book is it's a generational, not a generational change, but a struggle between the fathers who are of one generation and one mindset and the sons who are of another. And I think he does that pretty well. There's two downsides that I have with this novel. One is that despite the fact there is great conversation around LGBT issues, those characters are not given a whole lot of agency in the book. And I did see that in numerous reviews, so I'm not alone in that critique. I don't think takes that much away from the book, but I think it's something to be aware of. And the other thing is, this isn't just Cosby, but and maybe it's because I've read or watched a couple of things that had similar themes, but I'm a little bit sick of the parent, usually a father, who is not a very good parent, who then something tragic happens to the child, and then they decide that they're going to redeem themselves after the tragic event or usually death of their child, and that somehow brings them redemption. In my argument, that doesn't bring you redemption. You no matter what you do, you had the opportunity to be the good parent, and you weren't. I have a problem with that storyline, and that's such an underlying part of this book that it's hard for me to step away from that.
No, I get it. I mean, it is a trope. It's a trope, and it's a bit of a cliche, and it's a bit of a shortcut to justify revenge narratives, because you need to have a major reason to motivate a character toward revenge, to justify it in the eyes of the audience. And sometimes that justification makes sense. But when you see so many characters in so many novels justifying their failings with some huge act of violent revenge afterwards, it does beg questions. And so I did make a note of that. It does feel, and I said, when Ike and Buddy came across as these dicks, these assholes who are giving people tons of trouble that didn't have any direct involvement in any type of, situation involving their sons, it came across as, a little bit like temper tantrum, like toddlers. And I'm like, what? You don't get a free pass to terrorize people just because you don't know how to process your emotions. And so I did have some of that, like, come on guys, like, take a breathe, smoke a joint, and fucking think about your emotions for a sec before you start taking it out on everybody. I totally understand where you're coming from with that. And the other thing you said about Isaiah and Derek, and I did read some of those critiques as well. If you're looking for a backstory that involves Isaiah and Derek, the gay sons, I'm calling them gay sons because it's essentially that's what they are in the story. They're nothing more than that, because we never see them. We never see them interacting as human beings with each other or with their fathers. There's no backstory scenes where we see them sort of blossom or become full-fledged characters in the novel. They're always more just they're the sterno that lights the fire that gets Ike and Buddy going, but they don't actually develop into characters of their own. And that's unfortunate. I think I would have liked a little more from them,
Given the time frame that we're looking at this book, and it's still award season and all of that kind of thing, it's like I wouldn't be as strong on this critique if this book hadn't become a bestseller, hadn't gotten all these award nominations and whatever. I think it's worth that recognition, and certainly Cosby's work is worth that recognition. But I do think that once you reach that level, it opens the door to a little stronger criticism, because what I'd love to see is what Cosby can do with that feedback in the next novel, and that ultimately is what I'm most excited for, to see the progression of his work as we've seen two solid books come out, and what's going to be next, what's going to be built off of this narrative.
I think that's a good point. And I can only imagine the pressure that Cosby's under, because, when you become this sort of potential celebrity, when people are starting to look your way and anticipating what you're going to do next, like they did with this novel, it's hard to imagine the kind of pressure that like, for example, he was under to land it well. This wasn't his sophomore book. It was his third book, but to the eyes of most readers, it's his sophomore book, and the sophomore slump is real. And this is not a sophomore slump book. This is a successful novel that pushes his work forward in the way that he, rather than shying away from difficult topics, he confronted them directly. And obviously, I'm going to throw tons of praise at him for that, because I prefer bravery in fiction than paint by number formula, which so many people hold on to because they're so worried about the commercial stuff. At the same time, yeah, now that he's established, he's paying his bills. Things are, his career's taking off. Yeah, what happens next? How do we? Where does he go from here? And the critique does, it can be valid for that.
Well, that's it's an interesting critique. But the other thing is, we've, not that we're any kind of experts on everything that's coming out in contemporary crime fiction, but his voice is pretty unique, and his locations are definitely underrepresented in the genre. So, I mean, that's a positive, that's a really big thing. If this was yet another crime novel taking place in New York City or LA, it would be more of a challenge, but he does have a lot of material to work with.
Yeah. He's carved out a niche, and he's carved it out well. And I think we should probably transition to talking about characters and then talking about setting and these various aspects of craft and what's really working here outside of the general plot, which we pointed out.
Sure.
In terms of characters, there's quite a few. And I mentioned the main characters. I mentioned the sons. I mentioned Tangerine, but just barely. I mentioned the bad guys, but just barely. I think the bad guys are not very developed, which means I sort of think of the biker gang. You can just put any bad racist biker in and shoot them, and that's essentially as much development as they got. But of all the characters in the story, is there one that stands out to you more? One that excites you more? One that you think about after having read it?
Yes and no.
Okay.
You're right. See, the thing is, you're right. There's a lot of characters in this book, but there isn't a lot of development on those characters. And okay, just for listeners, it has been a while since I read this book. So this is what is sticking in my mind over time. It's Ike and Buddy Lee that are really developed in the book. There's not a lot of character development of the other characters, and therefore they don't really stick with you in your mind. Tangerine does, just because of the role that she serves in the book. The only other character that I can think of is, and I kind of feel like I said this, I could be making this up, but I feel like I said this for Blacktop Wasteland as well, is that like there was a gang of bad guys that collectively were interesting, but individually were not as developed as I would have liked them.
Yeah.
In that way, I might have been kind of nice to like narrow down the number of characters and then like kind of combine some of these elements into a smaller group of players, so that we could have that big bad or multiple big bads that they have to deal with. I'm struggling with the question because the characters that I wanted developed, I wanted to see some more flashbacks with the sons.
Yeah.
I wanted to see Isaiah and Derek, and it continually, I was hoping for this sort of throughout the whole novel. I was hoping for more background on the two of them and more depth. And I didn't quite get that, but they were interesting, and they were interesting enough to compel me to have that desire throughout the entire novel. So I guess that's who I would have liked to have seen, but that's not a great answer. How about you?
Well, I think that's a legitimate answer, and I think that's probably the best answer because I read Blacktop, and the bad guys weren't very developed in that novel, and that didn't get in the way for me. This wasn't about developing a complex antagonist. No. This was about developing complex protagonists in an area where complex development of antagonists or a protagonist doesn't happen as often in crime fiction. In that case, it was a working class black man in the South, and the spotlight was on the main character in Blacktop Wasteland, and it was incredible and rich and satisfying. In this case, the spotlight's on the issue, the dynamic between two men, black and white, middle class or lower middle class and working class, the issue of homophobia. It was definitely spotlights on issues, and the characters that were in that spotlight got the attention, and anybody outside of that spotlight was more just fodder to keep the plot moving. Even Mia, Ike's wife, doesn't play a significant role. She
No.
just says certain things but definitely she very much sidebar throughout the entire novel, just like Buddy Lee's ex-wife. The spotlight's very specific in this novel, and anybody that enters the spotlight with Buddy and Ike get the attention. Like Tangerine, who gets brought in once they find her and agree to help protect her in her situation, which I'm being vague about because I just don't want this to be too much spoiler heavy. But the Isaiah Derek thing is the obvious choice for characters that had the potential for development, who we would have loved to see a little more of that dynamic, because this was a story about homophobic dads and sort of their road back to, if not redemption, then at least an understanding of themselves in a different way. We would have loved to see some of that story in its early stages off screen, but that did not happen, and that's okay. S.A. Cosby focused on the present story rather than the past, focused on the revenge rather than the situation that led to what we have in this novel. So really, there's no other characters unless we want to talk about Tangerine. Sometimes I think of Buddy Lee too as a little bit of a stereotype of like the poor working class white guy from the South, but hearing his words, hearing his voice, hearing his perspective on his own situation helps to offset some of that a little bit. And I think the dialogue between him and Ike is why I yearn for it. I'm really happy when they're communicating with each other and being sort of like transparent with each other, because it's just rare. It helps to destroy those tropes, you know?
So let's for a minute, let's focus on that relationship, because you're right. Like, we've talked all around this, as you said, the spotlight is on the two of them. And to me, like, even though I agree with you that both of them in different ways feel a little bit stereotyped, but that's okay. But I also did feel that their individual thought processes and their relationship between the two of them, it felt fairly believable to me.
Yeah.
Even if there's problematic, like maybe, when I earlier said, like, I had this issue with them seeking redemption, and maybe that's actually an extension of, like, I feel like there are plenty of people in the world like this who would not come to terms with their own real life children until it was too late. I feel like I've worked with these guys. At the end of the day, they're going to say this stuff, do this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's their own problems that they have to work through to reconnect to their family.
Yeah.
And in that way, like, I think it's really well written, and I think it's believable, even if some of the walk in the door and beat up the character to get the next plot point is a little unbelievable. The conversations between Ike and Buddy Lee are pretty good, and like their development in terms of their relationship to their sons feels pretty believable as well to me.
And I really think that so many of the moments in this story that help to develop them actually are a disservice to talking about homosexuality and all of that, which makes me feel sort of confused. Like when they go to a gay bar that's named after, like, the Wizard of Oz, it creates interesting opportunities to develop and to show the discomfort in Ike, and it brings up interesting conversation between Ike and Buddy at the same time that it does this at the expense of sort of stereotyping the gay culture essentially, and so I walk away feeling disoriented in an interesting way that I don't really know how to feel about. But every moment in the story feels like it's setting them up to have the next conversation in their self-help, development out of this hole they've dug for themselves, this trap essentially.
All of this is taking place within this, again, like his other work, in this rural Southern setting. How did you feel about that part? Because that, I think he grabs, he definitely is kind of a master of that setting.
Just like Blacktop Wasteland, this is set in Southeast Virginia, in country that's familiar to Cosby. He captures the feeling and the look of the place. I haven't been down there, but I feel like I see it through his eyes, through the eyes of his characters. I don't feel like I'm in Anywhere USA, which is sometimes a thing that I feel when I'm reading some like commercial thriller, and I'm like, oh my God, like you say it's set in San Diego or whatever, Tulsa, but it just feels like I'm in a fucking box store parking lot all the time. I don't feel that here. I feel like I'm where Cosby wants me to be. And I'm a sucker for a good setting. I love good settings. I love settings that speak to the characters and that speak to the plot and that contribute something more than a backdrop. So I'm impressed and pleased with the setting and the way that Cosby knows what he's doing with that and continues to develop and deepen how the setting affects character in his novels. And I can't imagine him deviating from that too much going forward, but we'll see. He might have some surprises up his sleeves.
You're right. Like, I feel like I've been brought to that place. I'm not, there's very few, it's a very small geographic area in which this book could possibly take place. And that's the best way to bring us in and setting, is to make somebody who hasn't either been there or doesn't have a close familiarization with that location feel like they've gone on the trip to this place. And I think Cosby does that extremely well. I think when he gets into some of these clubs and some of these, and again, not giving away too much, but rural locations, I can picture them in my mind, and I feel like I can really see these places existing, and they're unique. And I think Cosby is really good at that. Anything else about setting? Otherwise, I want to talk about his action sequences a little bit.
Yeah, I want to talk about action too, but the last thing I want to say about setting is what Cosby does really well are these rural or semi-rural settings in both Blacktop and Razorblade that capture the character in these spaces that feel incredibly alive. Like I can hear them, I can smell them. Where he seems to drop the ball more often is when we go to the city, when we're in Richmond, when we're at the gay bar, when we're at the head shop with the anarchists. That's when I feel like we're resorting more to these tropes. So that might just be a lack of familiarity or development there. But I feel like as soon as we head back into the country, into these sort of edge spaces, all of a sudden things become three-dimensional again in a way that is beautiful. But it does seem to be clear to me that there's a distinction. So that's I just realized that now that seems to be what's happening for me.
Good observation. Yeah, I would agree.
But you mentioned violent or action scenes, and yes, the actions. Cosby has a penchant for action scenes that are particularly. I don't know. He might laugh at this, but Cosby-esque. Like there's over the topness and there's this intensity with his action scenes. He doesn't avoid violence by any means. But I'm curious to see what are your thoughts on the action scenes in this novel? What do you want to talk about specifically? What's sticking out to you?
I think they're good. I mean, I think you're right. They are over the top. This is more action movie type violence than necessarily realistic violence, but that's okay. And I don't mind that in this book, as long as like he's consistent with it, and he's definitely consistent with like what the level of action and violence is. And the reason I thought about this is I've recently dipped my toe back into Twitter. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've been following Cosby on Twitter. And one of the things that I've noticed is that Cosby seems to be a big fan of professional wrestling. I've heard very good genre fiction writers talk about paying attention to how, now we can all kind of go, yes, wrestling can be pretty ridiculous. It is ridiculous, right? But there is a type of storytelling going on there that is, it's physical, and there's like a plot narrative told through often, staged violence. And and the big thing about how they tell a story in a wrestling ring is that it is not like a UFC fight where basically when somebody starts to get an edge, they just decimate their opponent and that's the end of it. In professional wrestling, there's always a up and down. It's a roller coaster ride of back and forth in the fight scene until the ultimate victor comes out, which gives us lessons in pacing and how to tell a story through physical violence. And I'm not saying this articulating this how I would necessarily like. There's other people who you could look up and find out more about this. But I think it is interesting knowing that Cosby is a wrestling fan and reading his action sequences in his novels. And I can see some references there. I can see where that lineage of storytelling comes through into his work.
Fair enough. Yeah. Good observation. We're all a product of our influences, whatever they are. So I could totally see that carryover in some of the staging, some of the setups to how the action scenes play out, for sure.
I'm not saying that there's this direct correlation, but I can certainly see an influence.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the way the action scenes are set up, especially the finale, it might be speaking more to Hollywood than WWE in the way that Cosby might have anticipated, calls for options and what spectacle would draw the attention of producers looking to make a big buck. I mean, honestly, who doesn't want to get paid for their literary output? It's incredibly rare in society right now, and when you have the option, take advantage. And I would say, in terms of like writer's craft, action scenes, the way that he develops action scenes is particular. The thing that I love most about him, which I mentioned before, is the way that he develops character. He doesn't sidestep the hard questions on his road to developing his primary characters. He delves into complicated emotions with his male characters, which are all of his characters. If you're looking for a highly developed female protagonist, this isn't Cosby's thing. He's developing male protagonists and then developing their emotional side in a way that often doesn't happen in crime fiction. If that's the only thing that Cosby ever did, he would be doing a service to crime fiction. To counter that great gift that he's offering the genre, the one thing that I sometimes roll my eyes at, and Cosby, if you listen to this, I'm sorry, but occasionally the love for the Chandlerian simile, the love for sort of that creating those hard-boiled similes that Chandler is so often like cited for, can get to the point where some of the similes feel underbaked, like they're not ready for prime time. And I'm like, oh my God, another simile. Like for every third simile, there's a simile that I'm like, this should not be in here. We gotta workshop this one a little more. So there's a part of me that feels like one remedy to this would be cut every fourth simile, or just make sure that they're doubly workshopped, because similes are metaphors can work beautifully, metaphors can not work beautifully, but similes draw attention to themselves in ways metaphors do not. And sometimes I'm like looking for every simile has to be like a rock and roll simile, or it stands out like a sore thumb, to use a simile a little bit and to use a cliche. And sometimes I see them and I go, no, stop it. So I noted that in this book a little bit. And that was one thing that similes for me, it might just be a personal thing, but sometimes they can drive me crazy. Maybe people like similes that are a little bit, under or overcooked. I don't know, but I guess for me, I'm a little bit of a stickler.
Oh, I think there's going to be varying opinions on that one, Justin. I probably lean a little bit more towards your camp, but you're right. Yeah, there's a lot of them, and I mean that's not just Cosby. That's a lot of crime fiction writers like to do that. I think we're seeing it a little bit more often in his work, but yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it just is me. Maybe I have a problem with it. Maybe it's because I teach college writing and I see. Maybe I have an aversion to similes. Maybe I need to go to simile therapy.
I mean, I think it's fair to say they're overused in crime fiction in general because everyone wants to be a Chandler, right?
Yeah.
It does get to be a lot. And but yeah, so overall, if I'm going to summarize this book, I think it is another great example of Cosby's work. I think we can look forward to hopefully many more novels from him in the future. I think immediately when I started reading this, I was, one or two chapters in and I was like, okay, somebody is going to option this for a film. And we're probably going to see that. I mean, it is a book that would translate to the screen pretty well. I really think that what Cosby is especially doing in this novel, and this has been a theme of our show and what Justin and I talk a lot about in crime fiction, is addressing using crime fiction to address social themes. Cosby does this with racism, classism, homophobia, and toxic masculinity all in this novel, and he does a pretty good job of it. We can critique and certain aspects of that and say, well, this could have been better or that could have been better. But I mean, really, I applaud him for going after those issues, dealing with them in this rural Southern setting as well. But there's a reason why this book has made a lot of bestseller lists, and there is a reason why it's up for awards. So overall, I mean, a solid offering from Cosby, even if we've been nitpicky critical on a few things, just a very solid book.
I absolutely agree. While many crime fiction writers touch on social problems, most do so in some angular, oblique way where you can easily say that they're not addressing them or they're addressing them from a distance. Cosby takes issues of homophobia and transphobia and class and race head on. He uses his position as an upcoming crime fiction star to address subjects of social importance rather than aiming low for a quick buck. And he could have easily aimed low for a quick buck. And for this, he should and will continue to be commended, regardless of how many similes I think he underbakes. So
I wish I had a simile to use right now.
Yeah, I know. I could have been clever and come up with one. So he's in the early stages of the successful stage of his career. Who knows what that means? But he's in the limelight now, and he will be for however long literary crime fiction writers stay in the limelight. And we'll see what happens. It's fun to be here at the beginning of what's going to be his big moment, and write it out alongside him. So I look forward to seeing what happens to Razorblade Tears as a film. I hope they get him in there on the screenplay and not let some fucking idiots ruin it. And I look forward to seeing what he does next. But I was happily surprised to see this book almost at the same level as Blacktop.
Okay, folks, we're going to move into two little mini segments at the end of this episode. Justin, I think you have a short review for us, and then we're going to talk about the film Asphalt Jungle.
Yeah, we haven't done a short review in a long time. If those familiar with the podcast know that we used to do 5-round reviews. We would offer 5 short reviews in 5 minutes. It was rarely 5, and it was never 5 minutes, but we tried. I have one review, and I'm going to try to do it in 1 minute, about a book that's a classic, and it's a book that I have not read yet, and I thought I'd share my feelings about it. This is by James M. Cain, which most of you should be familiar with as one of the important hard-boiled crime writers of the mid-20th century. And the book I'm reviewing is Mildred Pierce, which came out in 1941. This has been sitting on my shelf for a while, and I don't know why I didn't get into it. I know that Sonic Youth references it in a song, and it was an unexpected offering. Knowing his real-life love for fine food and opera, if you haven't listened to our episode on James M. Cain, you might have missed the fact that in our backstory of him, he is a guy who is deeply, deeply invested in fine food and opera. This is a guy that studied these things as hobbies and wrote a cookbook and did all this stuff. So some of the subject matter in Mildred Pierce makes a lot of sense if you've read it or seen the film. But what I did not expect from this novel was a high-caliber domestic drama that does not have much, if any, physical violence or other noir depravities that I assumed it would have, given what I know about Cain. Of course, The Postman Always Rings Twice was premised on a murder. None of that in this one. This was a hard-boiled tale of can-do feminism set in Depression-era Pasadena. So Mildred Pierce is a flawed hero. She's full of spirit and vinegar. She has a daughter named Vera, who is an absolutely terrifying nemesis. I was impressed. I repeatedly in this novel, I thought, man, is Vera worse than Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men in terms of her just diabolical viciousness? And the answer is probably no, but I was so surprised by how terrible Vera was as a person that she does stand out. This novel could have easily gone cartoonish and overly melodramatic, and some people said that it does, but I thought that Cain landed it fairly well. The relationship of mother-daughter feels real, and this is why it's such a gut punch to read. Some may also complain about the day-to-day details of Mildred Pierce taking on her own life after she gets rid of her husband and sort of does it herself to ascend out of poverty and sort of claim her ownership over her own agency and becomes a successful restaurateur and business owner. I loved all these details. I loved watching her in the day-to-day manage to rise above her circumstances. It was, I don't know, refreshing. And I just loved being with her on her ride, on her journey toward her own personal redemption. And of course she's flawed and she picks crazy dudes and maybe she didn't do as much for her daughters as she could have. That said, I'm the kind of person who likes the budget keeping details in Henry Thoreau's Walden. So I like that specificity. I like seeing how something like this happens. And it's not an incredibly long book. And it's an exciting book. And it's a book that I completely didn't expect it to be. So if you haven't read Mildred Pierce and you're expecting it to be like Postman, it's not. But it's written in that same fresh, alive, Southern California hard-boiled style. I give it 4.5 hits, and I look forward to seeing the film adaptation. So that's my commentary on Mildred Pierce.
I would like to get back to Cain, although I haven't checked out his cookbook yet. Isn't that the one where he says we're like supposed to eat like beaver or something, opossums or something?
There's muskrat. Like there might be armadillo. There's a whole host of rural species that he tries to turn into successful restaurant menu items. I think as a way of creating a what is it called when you create a thing?
Fad.
Creating some restaurant fad, bringing money into the restaurateurs and drawing attention to that. But whatever.
Well,
it's an interesting book.
Americans could have a more diverse palate, but that might not be the way to go.
Yeah.
But the book sounds good, and that's one that's been on my list for a long time.
Yeah, it's worthy, and I appreciated the surprise because sometimes with crime fiction there's not much surprise, and I think the last time I was deeply surprised was when I read Horses.
Yeah, still my favorite novel from this show.
Interesting. That's awesome.
Well, we've got one more last little segment. We both watched the film Asphalt Jungle from 1950. And, Justin and I neither of us are film critics, but this is a classic piece of noir film. And, we just thought we'd give a few little thoughts about it. Justin, what'd you think?
Well, if I had to say three words, I would say I liked it. To expand upon that, I would say it's a well-crafted heist film. I learned that it was one of the first films to capture a heist in a realistic manner. So it's one of those films that sets the stage for an entire genre of films to follow. It's a crime tale set in a Midwestern Everytown, like it's a city in the Midwest. I imagine Kansas City, but it could be anywhere. I like Dix Hanley, the main character. He's a hooligan. He ain't some masterminding genius. He's the guy who beats the shit out of people and does small time crime. And he gets involved in this bank heist organized by Doc. I thought it was fun. It was fun to watch the heist develop, sort of like this detail oriented thing I said about Mildred Pierce. It's watching everything come together. Who are going to be the three guys that get fingered for the caper. They needed a box man, a driver, and a hooligan. $500,000 are potentially on the table for this heist, and I thought it was well crafted and carefully constructed, and the tone and the pacing were pretty solid. Overall, I really appreciated so many aspects of this film. What about it? Did you like it? And if so, what things stood out to you?
I have complex feelings about this film. And one is that, first of all, I mean, the plot is really, I mean, this is a plot we've all seen, right? A group of criminals and get together, they do a heist. That happens halfway through the film. They try to deal with the aftermath of the heist, in this case, getting rid of the diamonds. They get double-crossed, and then, the bad fallout happens. That's the plot, right?
You need to have a good fencer. If you don't have somebody to fence that stuff, like it all falls apart.
Yeah. Just a second here. I'm calculating. I wanted to know how much is $500,000 in today's money using the inflation calculator.
Okay. Well, I'm curious to know. I'm going to predict 1.7 million.
No, it is almost $5.9 million.
I guess I don't know shit about economics.
Well, I always like to do that because it puts me in perspective, better perspective of would this all be worth the double crossing? Would the rich lawyer who ultimately is supposed to be the fence double cross? Would almost $6 million be worth doing all of this for? And so the answer is probably yes.
Yeah.
I'm still reeling, actually in shock, Justin, that you liked the Dix character. I absolutely could not stand that actor.
Does he remind you of somebody?
No, I don't know. I didn't like his voice. I didn't like how it, listeners to this show are probably going to hate me for this, but it's not the first time. I'm sort of realizing that despite the fact I like some noir film, I do not really love noir film all that much. And I'll get to that reason in just a moment. I love the noir genre. I like neo-noir. But in this particular time frame, the big thing that drives me nuts is the Hollywood Code, the Hayden Code or whatever it was, where basically any criminal
the
has
Hays
to
Code.
The Hays Code, yeah. What throws me off is we get this pretty decent introduction to the criminals, and that's interesting, and I love seeing the gritty America of that time. I like like you said, the realistic depiction of a heist, and it feels fairly realistic, sure. Even up until the double cross, that's all good. But then we're 3/4 of the way through the film, and then we have to have this rather abrupt injection of the police and this like moral little talk from the police commissioner, and all of a sudden that I just hate that. And it's not the only film that I've watched from this period that has this issue where we get this police moralizing about 60 to 70% through the film. And then the last wrap up is then the crooks either dying or getting arrested or whatever. I don't have a problem with that happening to them, but I just have, if we don't even we barely even have a police character in the film up until that point. And then it gets dropped into the film to meet the code requirements. And I just really dislike that.
If we're all being transparent, I will say that I have a hard time watching film noir unless it's in the right setting. If I've watched this twice, not once, and I still had a hard time paying attention. And I'm a guy who reads a lot of books, so I have the attention span. It's just when I'm watching a film on the Tuesday night and it's a noir film and it's 2 hours and its pacing is sort of slow, I just start doing other work. I can't lock in. So I have a problem. That's my own personal problem, everybody. I guess I need to see a film noir therapist, but I need to have the right situation. It needs to be a Friday night. I need to have popcorn and a drink, and I need to lock in with other people. But when I'm alone, sometimes I lose the motivation, and that could be a product of the genre, but I think more it's a product of the film. And I will admit that this it happened twice with this one that I started to drift. And it might be that the trope is such a overplayed trope at this point that it's almost like reading a history textbook on film heist genres. It didn't, even if it's unique, it doesn't necessarily make it satisfying for me to watch in a way that keeps me, riveted.
Left with this one, I'm not really sure why it is so highly regarded. I'm no expert on noir film, so, take it as it is. But I'm thinking of other films I've watched that have more, that carry more weight for me in the back of my mind or whatever. The femme fatale in this is really underdeveloped. The double cross isn't even really that big of a deal. Some of the ending elements, like how these crooks end up with their comeuppance, is kind of well done. But so many of the, even the cliches of film noir that we're expecting don't even really materialize in this film. So I'm not really sure why this makes all of these best of lists. I would be kind of curious in looking at the novel that this is based on, because I'm curious, the novel outside of the constraints of the code, how did this all play out? That would be interesting to me.
Yeah. I haven't read the book. I did like the lighting. I thought of it as film noir light, but I also liked the cinematography. I thought cinematographically, the directing was really solid in this film. And I think it might be, maybe more film study buffs would say this film achieved certain things that other films struggle to achieve in ways that I might not be able to see as somebody who is admittedly a layperson in film study.
Anyway, that's a kind of a poor review of it, but we did take a look at it, and I
liked it. I thought it was good. I give it a 3 out of 4 or a 3.75 out of 5, but I liked it more than you. But I also liked Dick's Hanley, and you didn't. But I didn't. It didn't command my attention in the way other books do or other films do. So.
But anyway, I guess my review here is that I just, I had not seen this film, or I hadn't seen it in so long I forgot about it. But yeah, I guess I was just disappointed by, what is often considered one of the better film noir films out there. And, it is what it is.
Oh, we also forgot an obvious thing that would make it a better regarded film. It's Marilyn Monroe. It's one of her first films. It's her first film. It's a film that put her on the map as a seductive, whatever, sex kitten or however we define her in the context of film. So that I think that might elevate it more than it would be had she not been, a character in it.
True. Yeah. From a film history kind of point of view, I can see where people would get excited about that. She's really not on the screen more than a couple of minutes, I don't think.
No, yeah, a few scenes here and there.
For a film noir, the femme fatale is very underdeveloped. But the depiction of the heist is well worth it to me. I think that was probably the highlight of it of the film for me.
I would agree. And yeah, so there we go. Another film poorly reviewed by Kurt and Justin. Thank you, everybody.
That's right. Although in the future, folks, we probably will try to do a better film review, because we're considering doing some film to book comparisons. And I think if we actually seriously look at a film in that regard, I think we would be much better reviewers of films.
I think it would be more fun. I think it's hard to review a visual media on a podcast unless you have the tools and the language to review it. And I think it's a lot easier when you're reviewing a book.
Yep.
For me,
we are not film critics.
Okay, so let's wrap up here. Coming up in future episodes, this episode might come out in 5 years. Let's hope it's sooner than that. We've been a little bit slow in our pacing, but our next episode 66, we're going to go to Cuba. We're going to spend time with Cuban noir, and we're going to do this by reading and reviewing a book by Daniel Chavarria. He's a Uruguayan revolutionary. He moved to Cuba in the 1960s, and since then he's been writing crime fiction. And in 2010, he won Cuba's National Prize for Literature. We're going to review his book that was put out in 1994. It's called Adios Muchachos by Daniel Chavarria. So please take a look and see if you can locate that book. I got it for cheap as a Kindle book. It's considered hard-boiled pulp fiction set in revolutionary Havana. And that sounds like a freaking blast, a fun way to see the genre from a new angle. So that's going to be episode 66, and then we move on to episode 67. We're going to hang out with Elmore Leonard for the first time in the history of Point Blank Podcast. We haven't decided on a book. It might be Rum Punch. It might be another book. If anybody has any suggestions, if there's one Elmore Leonard book that we should review, which one should it be? We want to spend a half hour with it, an hour with it. Which one should we? Let us know. Give us your insights, because we haven't settled on anything yet. So that's that. How do they contact us, Kurt?
Yeah, well, you know what? We have a Facebook page. We have a Facebook group, and that would be an excellent place to ask what Elmore Leonard book we should discuss. So you can look for us there. It's Point Blank Hardboiled Noir and Detective Fiction. There are two Facebook pages, which is a little bit confusing. One is the main page for the show. The other is the group, which is more of a listeners discussion section. It's not super active, but I mean, a couple posts a week. So if you want to interact with us and other listeners, that's a great place to go. If you have a direct question for the show, you can email us at pointblanknoir@gmail.com. That's probably the best place to get a hold of us. So until next time, we'll see you. Take care. Enjoy the spring and outdoors.
Yes, enjoy whatever season it is when you're listening to our podcast. We are there with you.
Bye-bye.
That sounds sort of weird. Bye.
That's right, listeners. We're looming over your shoulder right now.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.